Welcome back to the second course stream of this week. Where had we left off? Well, we had just started to talk about the beginning of the Sino-Western trade conducted in Canton, right, here at the mouth of the Pearl River Delta. And we had started to familiarize ourselves with the geography, right? Macau is down here, and here is, of course, Whampoa, the mooring ground for Western ships, and up here is Canton. I said that we had this group of merchants, of Chinese merchants, Hong merchants, and many of them became fabulously wealthy. Here is one who is probably the best known, Hokwa, and it's the business name of one Wu Bingjian. And he was the leading merchant in Canton in his time, and he was one of the richest men in the world in the early 19th century. And this gives you an idea of just how lucrative this trade was, and how lucrative it was for the Chinese. Very interesting, right? These portraits are oil paintings, right? And they are actually done by George Chinnery. You should remember, he was that Englishman who stayed in China for several years painting, right, and sort of studying from Chinese painters and teaching Western techniques to the Chinese. Now, for these wealthy Chinese merchants, it was very fashionable to have a portrait done in oil, especially if you could, by a Western painter. Now, what's really interesting, and again I mentioned this before, is that this relationship then between Western and Chinese merchants was one that was really built on mutual trust. And here we have an account by William Hunter, who was a young American merchant who spent many years in Canton. And he's describing this relationship as such. He says, as a body of merchants, we found them, the Hong merchants, honorable and reliable in all their dealings, faithful to their contracts, and large-minded. Their private residences, of which we visited several, were on a vast scale, comprising curiously laid out gardens with grottos and lakes, crossed by carved stone bridges, pathways neatly paved with small stones of various colors, forming designs of birds, of fish, or flowers. It's nice that he that he doesn't just talk about their character and how wealthy they are, but they also have a really good taste in gardening. I think that's really nice. But what is important is that this relationship was clearly built on mutual trust and mutual respect. Here are some more examples of trade paintings or art that was traded. And again, it's not always easy to say whether this is a Chinese work or this is a foreign work. Well, the fan is most definitely a Chinese product that was sold to Westerners, right? And again, it's a view of Canton and those Western factories, those headquarters for the trading activities, right? And then on the right, again, you have those hongs, right? Those factories in Canton. Now, if you want to see more images, and this period is really well documented, I put a link to a Visualizing Cultures archive that was set up by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And you can spend hours and hours just browsing around, and I encourage you to do that. Here is another view of Canton and the foreign factories, roughly 1825. And I think it's really lovely. It gives you an idea of just how busy the river is, what they were doing. Here they have a cow grazing. Dairy products was not something that was readily available in southern China, so the foreigners probably figured out, well, why don't we have our own cow so we can make some cheese and yogurt? I don't know. Here is another image, right? This is obviously the American factory, right? The American flag. And again, look at the port and look how busy the port is, how many ships in the river. And then, you have people just selling stuff here, maybe snacks, I don't know. Now, of all the commodities traded in Canton, tea eventually became the most valuable commodity, right? And the Dutch, I already mentioned, that really played the most important role in that. Here on the left, you have what is known as an East Indiaman, right? These cargo ships, these Dutch cargo ships were known as East Indiamen. And by 1729, right, 70% of all the cargo that they brought back was actually tea. And in that year, that totaled 17,500 tons. Now, again, these journeys at that time were still a major undertaking, right? It would take 8 months to go to Canton and coming back. So it was usually a 2-year journey, right? You would then be there for the trading season, and the trading season lasted for 3 to 5 months. So homeward bound Indiamen leaving around Christmas or early New Year. Now, Europeans were not allowed to stay in Canton beyond the trading season, right? So, they would place their orders for tea or silks or textiles, porcelain, and then they were supposed to leave Canton for Macau, where they could stay until the arrival of the first ships for the next season in June or July. Now, up until the 18th century, there were very strict rules that the Portuguese had actually put into place, forbidding any non-Roman Catholic European to reside at Macau. But when the Chinese authorities insisted that, the denizens of foreign factories at Canton must withdraw to Macau, which was, of course, the only place where they could go, the Portuguese had no alternative but to accept them. And Macau apparently was quite a nice place to spend some time. So here we have a trade painting on the left, right? It says Macau was the most European of the Pearl River cities, described as a good Portuguese town with whitewashed churches, Western-style homes. This is a painting by Lam Qua, so this is a Chinese trade painting. Macau offered a lively social life, diverse population, intermingling Westerners and Chinese. And again, if you ever have the chance to travel there, even to this day, some of that colonial legacy can still be visited, including churches or the facade of a church and some of those residences. Now, as the saying goes, history always repeats itself. We know that when the Portuguese started the trade in China, and not just in China, right? When the Portuguese and the Spanish started to trade overseas, missionaries started to travel on their ships with them, right? And those missionaries, of course, were Catholics. And in the case of China, it was the Jesuits, right? So it's no surprise that on board of those East India Company ships of the Dutch, of the British, even of the Prussians, Protestant missionaries would start to hitch rides. And so one Robert Morrison, an Anglo-Scottish, arrived in China in 1807 and stayed there for nearly 27 years. And he was one of the first Protestant missionaries in China. And he faced heavy opposition from whom? Well, from the Catholics, right? But also from imperial officials. Remember, imperial officials also had been suspicious of the Jesuits, of course. And they tried to prevent him from learning, for example, the Chinese language. But he defied Chinese government orders, and he did learn Chinese. And he actually later on, he obtained a post as a translator for the East India Company to pay his bills. But he then ended up doing what he probably really had wanted to do, and that was to translate the Bible into Chinese, which was actually a capital crime. But still, he produced his own translation of the Bible into colloquial Chinese and the first Chinese-English dictionary. And then he, began to distribute them secretly with, some of his collaborators, some of them Chinese. He also trained several Chinese assistants to carry on his work, creating a small Protestant community. Now, along with missionaries and, Protestant faith, Western medicine also came to China. And again, I think this mirrors really what the Jesuits had done, right? The Jesuits also brought scientific knowledge, and in a way it was the scientific knowledge that was appreciated by the Chinese more than the Catholic faith, right? So Dr. Thomas Coolidge, here's a painting of him with patients, again by George Chinnery. Yeah, he opened an eye clinic in Macau. It was the first medical service run by a Western doctor for Chinese patients. And again, Chinese officials opposed the influence of foreign missionary who had only religion to offer, but if, there was sort of a practical benefit, like medical or in some cases, knowledge about modern warfare or weapons, it was tolerated. Now, after Thomas Coolidge, the Yale graduate Peter Parker continued his medical missionary work in Canton. And this actually led to a very long collaboration of Yale in China, the Yale Medical School, and they set up a university, Lingnan University, which actually exists still today, but now it's in Hong Kong, and it's an independent university. But the relationship still exists until this day. Wow, we've looked at a lot of images. I want you to look at even more images for today, because this week's assignment is really very much a visual assignment. I want you to start by reading the article, The Dutch East India Company and the China Trade, which is really not very long, but it's really very, very interesting. And then review the list of 17 images of Chinese West and Canton trade that I posted to iLearn. There's a link here that takes you to a long list, and I have numbered them for ease of navigating them. And then I want you to choose at least one of them. You can choose more. And I want you to write a report describing the image. Start by stating the number, so I know which one, or we know which one you're writing about, and then whether it is a portrait of an individual, a picture of a scene, an art object, and then use the appropriate questions from the ones that are listed here to derive as much information as you can from the image. So ask yourself, if it's a portrait, who is pictured? And what is the person doing? What can you tell about the person from his or her pose, clothing, and the setting of the portrait? List 4 adjectives to describe the person. What does the portrait convey to you about the person's life? Is the person rich or poor, successful, powerful? Why do you think so? For scenes, describe the setting, describe the activity. What are people doing? Is it a work scene or a recreational scene? What does the scene seem to be saying about the life of a merchant? And for an art object, what is the object and what is it used for? What decorations are on the object? What does the object reflect about the life of a merchant? Try to relate the painting to information gathered from the article, The Dutch East India Company and the China Trade, or internet research or other research that you might want to conduct. Your report should be between 300 and 500 words. And once you've posted your report, please comment on at least one of your peers' reports. Ask a question, fill in missing information, make an observation. I look forward to reading your reports, and I will see you again next week.